Well, does that how does that shape your responsibility to your readers, your feelings of portrayals by a franchise like Jurassic Park? And I'm sure because we're children of the '80s, that's far from the only one that did not have empowerment. In fact, there's a quote from you I wanted to make sure I ask you about. Well, I'll find it in a moment. But basically, if you are aware of a character that feels like they're not being represented, you feel you have a personal responsibility to include that character in the story.
I have a rule that if you are someone I know well enough that I would give you my phone number, like you're a person that I am acquainted with, and you tell me you never get to see people who look like you in stories, I will put someone who looks like you in a story at my first opportunity to do so. And that is because we all know we exist. You know that you're there, whether or not I ever write a character that you can relate to. But part of how we as people learn what people look like, learn what the scope of humanity looks like, is by encountering them in story. That is a known facet of how human psychology works. We learn empathy by reading about people and by hearing about people. And we learn to see other people as people by reading about them and hearing about them. And that is why representation in media is so incredibly important. Yes, it's important for you to be able to read a book and see yourself in the main character, but it is even more important for me to be able to read a book and see you as a main character. Which is why, and this is honestly unfair to everyone, if you ask someone, picture a generic protagonist, 90% of people, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, anything, will respond with white man. That's the default. White man has become invisible. It's not distracting. No one asks, why is he white? Why is he a man? Well, he's a white man. He is the generic protagonist. But if we actually wanted a generic protagonist by just human statistics, it would be an Asian woman. That is the most common single phenotype of human. So your existence should not be any more default than my existence. Everyone should have an opportunity to be in that role of generic protagonist that we all have to learn to empathize with. Because the problem becomes that you get generations of authors where all of the women are writing men brilliantly and all of the non-binary people are writing men brilliantly because we have been taught to empathize with men since we were born. But the men can't write women or non-binary people, and the women can't write non-binary people, because we have only been taught to empathize with who we are and with white men.
Shameless plug, since we happen to be recording this week, but check out episode 120, Esteemed Audience, with my interview with Payal Doshi, where she talks about her earliest fiction for years was writing about white men before she finally felt comfortable writing about an Indian family, an Indian character similar to her background.
Part of that is that we get told that white men will only empathize with white men. So if we want our books to sell and be successful, we have to write about those white men. And so we wind up putting our own identities on a back burner because we just don't trust that anyone else will come for the party. And that is not fair. It's not fair to kids who don't fit in that category. It's not fair to adults who don't fit in that category. I have had people older than me literally come to me crying because one of my books was the first time they saw someone that actually looked like them in a published piece of fiction. And that is profoundly unfair. I think that my greatest single weakness as a human is that I expect the universe to be fair. I know it's not, but I still expect it. And so when I can do something to rectify it, even a tiny bit, I will.
Just a curiosity, I ask these questions. I don't know the answer, which is why I'm asking. But if you're writing about a character, now you're 3 different people on paper already. That's the pen names we don't know about. But if you're writing about somebody sooner or later far outside of your personal experience, say if you're going to write about an Asian woman, well, you're a woman, you're not Asian. How do you temper that? Do you use cultural sensitivity readers that come in and kind of help you and make sure that you've done a great job of representation? Do you ever feel like, oh, that should be represented, but it's not my story to tell? What are your rules regarding things like that?
I mean, you say you don't know the answers. There really is no answer. There are best practices. There are things we can do to try and not be jerks. But there's no single, if you do it this way, it will work. I use cultural consultants and sensitivity readers, depending on what I'm doing. I do look at some stories and go, you know what? That story is not for me. My two sisters, my two younger sisters on my mother's side, are both Latina because they have a different father than I do. And we grew up in the barrio, not just in the ghetto, in the barrio of our part of California. So they were two Latina girls surrounded by Latino men who spoke a language they didn't speak, but who recognized certain physical features that they have. And so they were harassed by both the white kids for not being white enough and by the Latina kids because they were not Mexican enough, because they were not brown enough. And the story of their childhood, even though I shared it, is not my story to tell. It would be a white author capitalizing on brown pain. And that's not appropriate. There are enough stories that are mine to tell that there is absolutely no reason I would need to be telling that story. It is impossible to get a perfect answer, and sometimes the answer is wait. You know, one of my series under my own name, probably the series with the most penetration in a teen audience, is the Wayward Children books. And those start with Every Heart a Doorway and proceed onward from there. In Every Heart a Doorway, we meet a character named Cade. And Cade is a boy who went through a mirror into what they call a fairyland called Prism, where they wanted him to fight the Goblin King and be their next queen. And he finally one day stood up and said, well, I'm not a girl. I'm never going to be your queen. And they responded by kicking him out of fairyland. And that's how he wound up a part of our cast. So Cade is a trans boy. He would be a trans man if he were a little bit older, but he's a trans boy right now. And he is a trans boy who is explicitly written not to have always known, because he is one of those characters that someone I know and love came to me and said, I never get to see myself in fiction. When I see a trans narrative in fiction, it's always a case of, oh, I always knew. I always knew from the time I was born that I was a girl or I was a boy. And this friend of mine, he didn't always know. He is a man, absolutely a man, who will tell you that when he was a little girl, he did things this way. And so that's Cade's story. Cade is a man who was a little girl at one time. That is a genuine trans experience. It is not unique to my friend. It is not unique to Cade. It is rare in fiction. I am a cis author telling a complicated trans story with him. And so right now, Cade has to wait. And Cade has to wait until I have built enough trust with my readers that when they pick up a book and the first sentence refers to Cade as a girl, they don't get mad at me. So sometimes building enough trust that people will forgive you long enough to see that what looks like a betrayal is not, is the most important step.
One more question in this vein, and then I've got lots of questions for you about your writing habits and how you have built an empire. But you have built an empire. You've been nominated for several Hugos. You've written, how many books have you written now?
I don't know.
It's a lot, right? It's got to be like close to 40, 50?
More than 40. It's a lot.
So if somebody comes along and they have the authentic experience of whatever character we want to pick, but they do not have your background, they have not built your empire, they do not have your reach and your readership, does that tilt the scales at all if maybe they would be better working with you to get a better constructed story? Again, don't have an answer, just want to hear your thoughts.
I mean, you keep saying empire, but that really implies more of a Rick Riordan level. I am not at Rick Riordan's level. I would love to be at Rick Riordan's level. Rick Riordan could buy and sell me 90 times over. I like to eat, so I would love that. This is less of an empire and more of a struggling island nation. You know, we are very small. We don't have a lot of room for expansion. Sometimes we have tsunamis. People keep trying to take us over. We don't really know what's going on half the time. And I'm sure I've just said something accidentally insulting, and I am sorry. That was just kind of fumbling for a metaphor. I am not yet at a prominence level where it would really be an advantage for a marginalized writer to team up with me, nor honestly am I available at all times. You know, I am booked out through 2024 right now. It's a fun, fun day.